Previously on America. You guys remember the pet banks? Then the money that they have in the bank, normally banks would close. Farmers have been experiencing a depression for years. By October 1929, the word is getting out that we're having a lot of these problems out in the West, and the stock market crash hits. And he is trying to use volunteerism in the recession that is happening in 1929. And the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act is a tariff that is probably the biggest tariff that we've ever signed. People start doing runs on the bank. It begins to spread as the hysteria begins to spread. The damage is done. By the end of 1932, there's 25% unemployment. Hoover is going to get demolished by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so into office comes Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, what's going to be unique about Franklin Delano Roosevelt is he is actually going to win 4 elections, the only president to actually serve for more than 2 terms, which tells you how popular he's going to be. And to a lot of people, we have the government is going to now take the stance that they're looking for. We are now looking at a government that seems to be the government that the populists have cried for, that the progressives have cried for. And now, here it is. Franklin Delano Roosevelt launches the New Deal. When FDR comes into office, one of the things he has to do is get the economy back on track, and he also has to calm the people. And he's going to do that in his first inaugural address in 1933. You guys may have heard of this inaugural address before, at least one line of it where he said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself."
The thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
And what he's trying to do is to get the American population both on his side, but he wants to tell them that the fear of the economic recession or the economic depression is a problem in and of itself, and he's going to call for powers of a wartime presidency to handle this economic ordeal. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt's domestic agenda is going to be called the New Deal. And here, just like his cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, who had the 3 C's, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to have the 3 R's. The New Deal is going to focus on 3 things: relief, which is short-term, immediate emergency relief to people who need it. In other words, creating jobs. The next one is recovery, in which we are going to create legislation that is going to get the economy back on track. And finally, reform, the long-term reform that ultimately he thinks that is going to be, and other progressives think that they're going to be important to fix the issues of the Gilded Age. We're going to see things like, we're going to see legislation that's going to protect the bank. We're going to see legislation that is going to eliminate child labor and increase and create a minimum wage, creating an old age pension, creating oversight over the stock market. So all of these, the relief, recovery, reform, is a massive agenda that is going to be used to get the United States, at least we think it's going to get the United States back on track. Roosevelt is going to, in his first 100 days, push for and sign more legislation than any other president in history. Number one, I talked about in the last video that there's a significant structural issue with the banks. And one of the first things he does is when he comes into office, he wants to stop the banks from closing. So he's going to order a nationwide bank holiday, and which is going to be several days long, which all the banks are intentionally shut down. And what is important with this is this gives them time to help pass legislation to help reform the banks. But more importantly, they need to stop the runs on the bank, and they need to determine which banks are successful enough to open up. So after the 5-day bank holiday, when they open up, they're going to open up and put the federal government behind only the banks that are strong enough to stay alive. And so a part of this is a passage of some significant legislation that is really, really important to the overall New Deal and the issue with the structure of the banks. And that's the passage of a very important piece of financial legislation called the Glass-Steagall Act, or the Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act. And here, the Glass-Steagall Act is going to do a couple of things. Number one, it's going to require the banks separate their investments from their deposits. So in other words, this is going to prevent the banks from investing the direct deposits into the stock market. So gone are the days of the ability to buy and borrow money from the banks to invest into the stock market. But another very important piece that we still see today is something that is part of this Glass-Steagall Act. It's something called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is called FDIC. Check your local bank. A look on their door. They almost all of them will say member FDIC. And so what FDIC is, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, it's an organization that they're going to create in order to insure people's money up to a certain point. So people are making runs on the banks, and they're pulling all their money out because they're desperately afraid that the bank is going to fail and they're going to lose all their money. But what the FDIC does, it insures people's money. So if the bank fails, the United States government will send money to the person to replace a certain percentage of their money. Why is that important? That's going to put more faith into the banks. Guys, we need the banks full of cash. We need the banks lending money. And the FDIC creates this support and creates this trust in the banks that weren't there before. Another big portion of the success of the New Deal is Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to do something that no one has done before. He's going to utilize media, specifically the radio, in order to educate the people about what his New Deal is. And so what he begins to do in 1933, in the week of March 12th, I think, in 1933, FDR is going to begin his first fireside chats, where he does this weekly address and in essence tells the people what steps they are taking to fix the problem of the Great Depression. This is incredibly important because not only is it going to be important to get people to trust him, guys, he's going to be elected 4 times, but it's important for people to be calm in this storm, and this is what he's trying to do. So every week he's had a new address. His very first one is to talk about the banks. So let's jump right into the relief part of the New Deal. The relief part of the New Deal, we have to understand, guys, there are several organizations that are going to be created through the New Deal. And we're just going to look at one, but there are dozens of different relief organizations that are going to be used to help provide immediate relief and get people employed. But the most significant one is going to be the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And basically what the CCC is, it is a government-run working organization with basically these camps of workers, typically young men from 18 to 24, that are going to be employed to, it could be to build roads, to build parks, to plant trees, all of these things. What the government is doing is they are directly employing young men to work for the CCC. And what do they want them to do? They want them to work during the day. They create camps, they feed them, they clothe them, and they send them out to work in order for them to send their checks back to their families. And so the CCC is incredibly important to create this general stability for the young men in society. Now, another major employer that is going to be created by the New Deal, and I kind of put it in the large realm of reform because of what it does, is the Tennessee Valley Authority. And the Tennessee Valley Authority is going to be an organization that is going to begin building dams around many of the the rivers around Tennessee and northern Alabama. And they build those dams in order to generate electricity. And so the Tennessee Valley Authority is going to be very important to electrifying that kind of Midwestern rural areas. But they're also going to be a major employer. So with building all those dams, all those people need to be employed. People need to be employed to work in those dams to create the electricity. And then we're bringing electricity to the rural parts of the United States. These are massive government projects. Now, a couple of the items that were supposed to be put together in order to guide recovery are going to be the NRA and the AAA, and we'll talk about them respectively. The NRA is going to be an extremely controversial organization that's going to be constructed by the government. This is the National Recovery Administration. Now, this National Recovery Administration is going to be a combination. It's going to be an administration that is going to bring together laborers and going to bring together business owners in order to limit excessive competition. They're going to create corporation codes to talk about how to limit how much each company can produce and how much they could sell it for, how much they should charge, or how much they should charge for labor. All of those things, creating this general these codes that all the businesses are supposed to abide by. They're going to set prices, make sure prices don't fall too low. Now is not the time to get into price wars. They're going to limit production. Ladies and gentlemen, all of these limits to competition is going to be extremely controversial. And particularly because it seems like a lot of these codes are going to be set by bigger businesses. So the NRA is going to be something that is really going to force a lot of the smaller businesses out of business. But one of the things that the government is going to do, again, we're going to do a lot, we're going to appeal to the patriotism of the people and the patriotism of the businesses. Get on board with the NRA. As a matter of fact, you see this NRA figure with the eagle and the lightning bolts, and it says, "We do our part." People would have posters of that, and they would put it up in their window to say that I'm a supporter of the NRA and I'm doing my part. I'm abiding by the codes in order to make sure we maintain a high standard, high prices, so we don't have to cut wages and things of that nature. But ladies and gentlemen, the issue of setting codes and setting prices and intentionally restricting competition is going to be a big deal. And what's going to happen is we are going to start seeing the Supreme Court begin restricting a little bit against the New Deal. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court determines the NRA is unconstitutional. You can't require setting prices. You can't put reproduction limits on these competing companies. And so the Supreme Court declared that this is unconstitutional. So we are actually seeing the Supreme Court beginning to put a squeeze on this New Deal. Now, let's also look at another major piece of recovery that was thought to help put us back on the right track, and that's going to be the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which is created by the Agricultural Adjustment Act. What the AAA is going to do is they are going to begin to create subsidies for farmers not to produce more crops. And so why is this important, especially for the farmers? Well, the farmers have and always have been suffering from overproduction. Because they have to produce more crops, that lowers the price of the crops that they're selling. So the AAA comes in and they are going to provide subsidies for farmers to take portions of their crops out of production to limit the amount of crops that are in there to keep the price artificially high. Now, so here's the thing. Remember, guys, when there are always unintentional consequences of things like this. So, for instance, the Agricultural Adjustment Act only focused on landowners. So, in the Deep South, you guys remember what's still happening down there. Sharecropping is still a significant portion. What a lot of the landowners did is they would continue to produce crops on a majority of their land, but they would kick the sharecroppers off the land that they were going to get subsidies for. So they took the sharecroppers' land out of production, received the federal subsidy for the sharecroppers' land. Who does this affect? Guys, this is affecting primarily African Americans, because remember, after the Civil War, what's the new economy that's developing? Sharecropping. And so this Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which is supposed to be created in order to help farmers, that's what the farmers want. They want to limit the competition so they can keep prices high. Sharecroppers, African American sharecroppers, are going to be kicked off the land so they can get that subsidy. And so the Agricultural Adjustment Administration also receives pushback from the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is going to determine it is also unconstitutional. And so it looks like the expansion of role in the government is being tamed by the Supreme Court. So 2 of his major pieces of recovery are unconstitutional. Let's jump into our time machine and let's fast forward and let's just move forward to 1937. You guys ready? Here we go. Strap in your time machine. Here we go. Are you ready? Oh, shoo. We are in 1937. So after several years, after at least two significant unconstitutional rulings for 2 major pieces of the New Deal, 1937, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to do something that is going to leave some negativity on his administration. And this is going to be called the court packing scheme. And what he's going to attempt to do is pack the court. He wants to pack the court with all New Deal supporting judges. So he tries to get some legislation passed. He tries to get a piece of legislation passed that's going to remove all justices 70 years or older. But he wanted to increase the amount of justices on the Supreme Court from 9 to 15 so he can pack them full of pro-New Deal justices in order to pass the rest of the New Deal. This is going to be, he's going to get a significant amount of pushback from this now and throughout history, as is really considered a manipulation of our democratic process. But let's go back. All right, this is in the future. Let's go back in time and talk a little bit more about the New Deal. Okay, everybody, strap on your safety belt. We got to go all the way back. Here it goes. Shoo! All right, man, that's a lot of fun. Okay, so let's continue and talk about reform. A big piece of the reform, in order to make sure we have a strong economy and a strong, sound institutions moving forward, is going to be oversight of the stock market. That's not a shock. Didn't we just talk about the stock market crashing and how that kind of was a trigger to set other things off? He's going to push forward the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to oversee the selling of stocks in the stock market and to make sure that no one is taking advantage of the stocks, no one is insider trading, and putting regulations on the exchanging of the stocks to make it more stable. Okay, let's fast forward to 1935. 1935 is passed another significant piece of legislation that is going to make this era a little bit different than in the 20s and before. And the passage of the Wagner Act, or this is also called the National Labor Relations Act. But the Wagner Act is going to be an act that is going to give the right of labor to organize and collectively bargain, which in essence is saying that anybody who is wanting to create a union now has the right to organize and collectively bargain if they wish. We have a governmental recognition of the right of workers to unionize. But another extremely important, long-lasting, and structurally and life-changing act that is going to be passed, Social Security Act. And they call this old age pension. And so what does the Social Security Act do? It is an act. It is an act that is going to create a trust fund that you pay into, and you are to after a certain age, which at the time was 65, and now it's older. At a certain age of 65, once you hit that certain age of 65, you can stop working and begin collecting your Social Security checks. And this is important. What does this do? Okay, so it does a couple of practical things. Number one, it takes the elderly out of the workforce, especially if they don't want to be in the workforce, and that gives you a pension, an old age pension that creates more security for the old age workers. But it also takes, as I said before, the elderly out of the workforce, providing more opportunities for people who are younger to work. Again, the whole point of we want to give as many people back to work as possible. One way is to make sure that this old age pension is in place. Guys, this is tremendously important. Still here today, and millions of people for years to come and from years ago depend on this as a piece of supplemental income when they retire. And so by 1938, the New Deal, there's been 2 New Deals now. He gets reelected and he's coming in with another New Deal. But probably the most significant one, at least on your life, is going to be the Fair Labor Standards Act. And what the Fair Labor Standards Act is going to do, it's going to create something that is going to seem very modern now. The Fair Labor Standards Act is going to establish a minimum wage for all laborers. But also, it's going to create a 40-hour work week. This is where we get the 40 hours from. Now, if you work more than 40 hours, employers are now required to pay you overtime. You must get paid a higher amount of money. So now it's a 40-hour work week. Now there's a minimum wage, and they officially pull all the children out of the workforce. There's no child labor under 16 with certain exceptions. You can get a permit. There's an exception about farm labor. But this creates the working environment that we very much see today. Minimum wage, 40-hour work week, remove children from the workforce. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, because of all this, we're getting ready to see a major shift in politics. I've been asked this question a lot about Democrats and Republicans switching, and we're going to see a major shift in politics in 3, 2, 1. And what happens is this New Deal is going to change politics, and it's going to change the demographics of who is supporting whom. In particular, unions now they were kind of in between both Republicans and Democrats, but now they are strongly supporting Democrats. Why? The Wagner Act gives them the right to organize, those pensions and things of that nature. That gives them the right to organize. Democrats are now going to seal up the unions as a major voting bloc. But more significantly, we could mark the New Deal where we start seeing a switch of African Americans voting generally voting from voting Republican to voting Democrat. One of the reasons is because largely the New Deal was intended to be colorblind. So the CCC, WPA, all are employing African Americans. All of the benefits were intended to be open up to African Americans. So the Republicans, this is where the Republicans are going to lose a significant amount of support from African Americans over the coming years. So there is a major change in politics that will continue to exist for decades to come. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we can't just sit here and celebrate FDR without talking about his critics. One of FDR's biggest critics is going to be a priest by the name of Father Charles Coughlin. Now, he comes to fame because he has one of the most listened to radio shows in the United States at the time. As a matter of fact, he has 40 million listeners, and he goes on the attack against FDR. As a matter of fact, he started criticizing him, saying that the New Deal only supported big business, which kind of had a point. Remember the NRA that eventually became unconstitutional? Father Coughlin was pointing that out, that it is very much an organization that supports big business. As a matter of fact, it was big businesses who were making those codes. But also, he believed that FDR should have nationalized the bank. He wanted FDR to, and what that means is he wanted a government takeover and government-run banks instead of having those individual private banks. And now, one of the reasons why he does is Charles Coughlin was pretty well known for his anti-Semitism. He believed that it was the Jewish people were controlling the bank, therefore they're manipulating the money, they're responsible for the recession, and so he goes after FDR for some of these issues. Let's listen to one of his speeches. You can kind of hear some of that criticism, particularly towards Jewish people, in one of these speeches.
The Depression still waxed strong as the powers of deflation reached out to confiscate homes, to capture farms, and to keep that ever-marching army of jobless upon our streets, wondering when God in his mercy would lift his hand. I dared you and challenged you to organize so that the people, if not the president, would drive the money changers from the temple, and you did it.
So who do you think the money changers are?
They believe that the Federal Reserve Bank has the right to coin and regulate the value of money. They're not even Americans, these so-called Democrats and Republicans. You appreciate the fact, my dear friends, that among other things in the National Union for Social Justice, we are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it.
So the criticism goes even farther. And there's another critic, and this is a guy from Louisiana. His name is he's probably one of my favorite people of all time. He's Huey Kingfish Long. And he believed that FDR didn't go far enough with his social programs. He supported something called the Share Our Wealth campaign. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to tax the wealthy, and he wanted to give each American person $5,000. And they want to give them $5,000 yearly to share the wealth and take that money away from the rich people. And he was very popular. The thing is he gets assassinated before it really goes anywhere. But let's listen to one of his. Now, he is my favorite because I love his hand gestures. When he speaks, he always throws his hand up in the air. Let's take a look.
According to the tables which we have assembled, it is our estimate that 4% of the American people own 85%
Oh, by the way,
of
I think he was drunk in this video.
And that over 70% of the people of America don't own enough to pay the debts that they owe. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business.
Give me some of that grub. He ain't got no business. But the most important thing here is we now can follow the progression. Remember back when I was yelling at you guys in class about the populists and leaving little nuggets of ideas behind? Well, They did. And remember, we looked at the progressives, and the progressives picked up some of those ideas and moved forward with them. And now the New Deal seems to be the cap. And we see this growing progression of likelihood of using government to aid the people. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the New Deal in a nutshell. Next, let's talk about how we get into World War II. We'll see.